Good evening to all our dear viewers. I, on behalf of the Corporate Laws and Corporate Governance Committee, welcome you all on today's webinar on Board Excellence, Rights and Responsibilities of Directors. So on behalf of our chairman to the committee, CA Dr. Debashish Mitra sir, past president to the ICAI, chairman to Expert Advisory Committee, and vice chairperson, CA Shri Priya Kumar ma'am, a very warm welcome to you all. In today's session, we are having with us the two eminent speakers with us to speak on the topic of the day and to share their expertise, knowledge, and experience on the topic, Board Excellence. So here the Board Excellence points on directors fulfilling their roles effectively, guided by the principles of accountability, transparency, and integrity. So let us have a brief introduction of our speakers. Yes, we are having with us CA Veni Thapa ma'am. She is having a vast experience of more than 25 years in the field of statutory and internal audits of the companies, banks, PSUs, and other organizations, consultancy, indirect and indirect taxation, including international taxation, company law, FEMA, and RBI Matter information systems. She is a sitting member on the boards of directors of various companies. And another speaker with us, CA Archana Bhutani ma'am. She has a nearly 25 years of vast experience relating to the technical advice on corporate law, accounting, auditing, and other related matters. Archana ma'am has been a special invitee to NACAS and has been a special invitee co-opted member of various committee of the ICAI and has been there into various committees. So when I talk about the topic board excellence, basically it refers to the effective and efficient functioning of the company's board of directors in fulfilling its governance duties. And therefore, this concept is essential for maintaining the integrity, accountability, and overall success of an organization. And that is why board strives for excellence that ensures it operates with a higher degree of professionalism, transparency, and adherence to the best practices. And that is why ultimately contributing to the long-term sustainability of the company. So the directors who are entrusted with this responsibility of steering the company toward its strategic goals while safeguarding the interest of the stakeholders, including the shareholders, employees, and other broader communities, their rights and duties are governed by corporate laws, regulations, and the company's own policies. So yes, today's webinar, the discussion will be in the FAQ format rather than in the presentation form. And we shall be taking up the issues before our experts, and they will be sharing thoughts, process, and their views on the basis of their practical experience. So now moving to our experts with the various issues pertaining to the board's excellence. So let's take up the first issue that arises with respect to the basic understanding of board directors' roles and the eligibility. Now, the first question that arises is with respect to the basic eligibility criteria and the specific educational qualification. So generally it is being asked what are the basic eligibility criteria and specific educational qualifications and critical skills for someone to serve as a board director. So I would request Vini ma'am to throw a light on this perspective of the board of directors' roles and eligibility. Over to ma'am.
I'm sorry, I think I logged off for 10 seconds, Nisha. Could you repeat what you just said in the last 10 seconds?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. But ma'am, the basic question that issues that generally comes is what are the basic eligibility criteria and specific educational qualifications and critical skills for someone to serve as a board director?
So thank you, Nisha, and thank you to the entire committee as well as ICAI for having us here. Thank you, dear participants who are here and listening to us on this forum of directors' role and eligibility. I'll just take you very quickly through what you're saying. There is no defined segment that one person can be a director or not a director because they have a particular qualification or not. However, what has happened is that as far as directorships are concerned, there are two segments to any directorship. One is a functional director and one is a independent director. I think everybody is aware of the meaning of these respective terms. And what I would like to answer or sort of inform you is going to be divided into two portions. One is going to be the functional or the operational director. Am I audible?
Yeah.
All right, because
Yes,
your camera went off, so I wondered what happened. Sorry. So one will be in terms of the functional director, and second will be in terms of the independent director. As far as functional directors are concerned, I think there's not a lot that I need to explain to our audience. It has to be a person who is qualified in the respective functions that it is going to ultimately deliver in any organization. If it's going to be financial functions, it has to be a person on the board functionally who has the holistic view of finance and regulations and accounting segments, as well as various other regulatory parameters. If it's going to be a person who's at the MD level, he or she should have the all-round skill of that business, along with being able to manage all the other people who are going to form a team under him to or her to deliver on that subject. What is, I think, a more pertinent area that the audience would like to know is that if it's the independent directors, what is the basic eligibility criteria or an educational qualification that they need? Typically, educational qualification could be in any professional field, although even a basic graduate would qualify to be a director if that person has enough experience in that particular line over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years. However, there is an institute of Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, which has come up with an independent data bank for independent directors, where it's mandated by the company law, where all aspiring independent directors or sitting independent directors, barring a few who fall into the criteria of experience, have to register themselves at that portal as well as appear for an exam. So if you ask me, as far as independent directors eligibility criteria is concerned, the first point would be to register yourself at that portal, and the second would be that unless you're exempted from, please take that exam. If you ask me, I would say take that exam anyway, because it adds to your profile that you have gone ahead and qualified yourself, even though you have the experience. But I leave that to the discretion of whoever's handling that matter. Educational qualifications typically would range from, in the compliance segment, from professional qualifications like CA, chartered accountants, and cost accountants, etc. Legal lawyers would also be a boon in that segment. But every organization does not need only CAs, although they do need them very badly. They also need people coming from the technical background. So a holistic board would typically be a board where there would be qualified people, experienced people, both qualified and experienced people in the financial segment, in the compliance segment, in the business segment, in the risk segment, in the HR segment, and preferably now also somebody who has some skilling and upskilling in the ESG segment, although the existing directors can upskill themselves in that area as well. Depending on the size of a particular company and the size of a board, ultimately all of these areas become important to my mind. Would you like to add something to that, Ashwin?
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, let me just start by wishing everyone a good afternoon. And I think today the Institute is celebrating their audit day, as I read in the newspaper. So we want a very happy audit day. Thank you, Veni, for setting the tone. I think that's very, very helpful. I'm just going to take the audience back to the basics, just to kind of put it together. I think when you look at the hierarchy of corporate governance, the way I see, you've got memorandum, you've got articles, you've got shareholders, and then you've got the board. So when you look at that role the various stakeholders play, it is very obvious that the board of directors is one of the top bodies, top performing decision-making authority of any company. Now, the decisions of the board give direction to the company to achieve its goals, its mission, vision, whatever you want to call it, in a time-bound manner. The board of directors comprises individuals who are elected or appointed by following a particular process, which is laid down in the law. And there are certain qualifications and experience requirements as mandated in the Act. But like Veni said, there's no minimum or there's no qualifications in terms of, the criteria that, for example, it could just say independence, or it could be, do you have any there are disqualification criteria also, like a person of a unsound mind, or let's say someone who's had some conviction by the court. So there are some qualifications which are laid down. In terms of the size and structure, as Veni mentioned, there is no one size fits all. It will depend on factors looking at the size of the company, the need, the type of industry. So usually you'll have minimum, if you're looking at a public company, for example, there'll be minimum 3 directors, and minimum and maximum are prescribed under law. I'm not getting into that. But typically public companies have to have a minimum of 3. But what is an optimal number would depend on various factors, though typically in a good organization of a reasonable size, if you were to look at it, I think it ranges from maybe 7 to 10. And you will have a good mix of executive, non-executive, and so on. Of course, if a board is smaller in size, it can be more agile, efficient. But when you look at the benefits of a larger board, you do get diverse perspectives. It also brings in more, if I can put it, more disciplined or unbiased kind of requirements. That's what I'll leave it at that. But like when he said, no per se educational requirement. But if I was to just take a minute also to talk about the board composition here, while the minimum board composition is specified in law, I think if you were to look at it from a best practice, apart from meeting the minimum requirement, size, as well as, let's say, the independence, I think some of the other things that a company should look at is the skill sets which are needed. And I think that is what Veni was in a way alluding to. So I think when you're looking at, it's not just about looking at, okay, these are the qualifications as per law, I have met them, and therefore let me just take this person. But I think when you're also looking at establishing a strong board, a lot of factors need to be considered. You need diversity of gender, you need diversity of experience, you need diversity of age, you may need diversity of geography. So there are many, many factors which will go into looking at, when I say eligibility, I'm talking about eligibility from not from a law perspective, but from the needs of the company also. And of course, the stronger or the better the quality of the board, comprising of the board members, of course, it gets reflected in how the company is also valued. The board does play a very important role in terms of building trust between the various stakeholders and the company, and therefore the quality or the quality of the board becomes very important. And of course, there also the chairman plays a leading role in terms of how the overall functioning. But I'll just leave it at that. I just wanted to add to what Veni said in terms of looking at not just the minimum qualification criteria in law, but also looking at the needs and trying to have a good mix, executive, non-executive, a good mix even in terms of the skill set, as far as depending on the size and nature of the company.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, next issue is how board composition with age diversity can improve decision-making and strategy and the practical steps to achieve this balance. So this issue, I'm just bringing before Archana ma'am. Ma'am, kindly just guide our viewers how we can go with this age diversity.
Yeah. So I think in a way, it connects with just the issue that we discussed in terms of the board composition, and I did refer to diversity. The importance of diversity in the board, you cannot, let me put it like this, emphasize enough. There's a lot of conversation in terms of gender diversity. We also talk about diversity in terms of experience and so on. But I think the transformative power of age diversity is something that at times gets overlooked. And I'll just add a few bits, and I'm sure Veni will have more insights to this. If you look at the recent times, the discussions of onboarding younger members to the board has started happening, but it's been happening in pockets. It's been a bit slow, but I was recently just reading some of the data, and it seems in the last 10 years, if you see, the number of board members below the age of 45 has moved from, let's say, 10.7, around about 10, 11% to, it has moved to around 14%. So there's been a shift. And of course, when you look at the boardroom, a good mix of younger and maybe experienced directors does help. It has its own advantages, the interplay between them. It can contribute to the growth trajectory of an organization. And again, there are many, many benefits. If you look at it, again, going back to some statistics, if you look at the population, more than 50% of the India's population, as I understand, is below the age of 25, and more than 65% is below the age of 35. So since you have a younger customer base, I think there is a bit of benefit in terms of even having younger board members who can understand the pulse of the market. Similarly, if you look at the recent trend in terms of management, you've got there's been a trend of younger CEOs and senior executives. So again, that connects with a good case to have younger directors. And again, of course, disruptive technology, that as well as even from a succession planning, these are all reasons, I would say, why age diversity does become important. And when you look at a balance between experience and, maybe the younger one, there is quite a bit of synergy. So you have from the younger one, you get that innovative of creative thinking, whereas you get wisdom from your experienced board members. As far as younger is concerned, they can think about new ways of working, whereas your experienced members do have tried and tested leading practices. Technology, of course, is something it's easier, whereas judgment of the experienced member becomes more relevant there. So I think there's quite a bit of balancing act. Look at enthusiasm of the younger one and measured conservatism, if I can call it, of the experienced one, agility, stability, many, many balancing factors. I do feel this does help. And I am aware that probably Veni does have some thoughts in terms of how age diversity can be helpful. So I'm just going to pass it on to her.
So thanks, Archana. You've actually more or less covered just about every aspect. But, and I agree, we are seeing a significant shift now from the 60 plus age group, and the directors being sort of adopted on boards only after their retirement, so that their experience oblique their contacts oblique their, I mean I'm being a little candid, but that's the reason why you and I are here, that typically the board members would be chosen for, number one, the experience, but also for their contacts, because they've retired and they've been there, done that. And also they have a lot of time to be able to give to the board as compared to maybe a younger member or a person who is in active assignments in other segments of their profession. But having said that, while I'm in total agreement that age diversity is going to be, diversity of any kind for that matter, you're specifying on age diversity, I would say every diversity with gender, diversity with age, diversity with education, diversity with experience. So the very first question also actually had a lot to do with diversity, bringing people on board who are from different segments of profession or experience. So diversity, I am with that, because without that, a board is just a single thought process working in exactly the same direction, and everybody is doing the same thing. That's not the purpose of having a board at all. A single member can also make that decision. But specifically to answer your age diversity issue, the fact that you brought out that the younger generation typically has the energy and the innovative mind to do things differently. Plus, as our own population in India, at least, is on a much younger level at this point of time. We have a holistic population on younger, middle age, senior levels. So everybody's input becomes very, very important, and you can't just do things the way they've always been done and think that that's going to work forever. So, but I particularly feel if I was to put a board together, if I was given that responsibility, I would bring in the younger generation more from the business aspect, and the older generation more from the compliance aspect. I would bring in the older generation, the mid-level generation from the business aspect as well, because they have little of age, experience, and the wisdom of bridging the gap between the younger generation and the older generation in the board, to actually have a holistic board. But typically speaking, I would still leave the compliance angles and the monitoring angles, the reputational angles, and many other such areas in the hands of the more experienced people. I won't work on any age specification, but I'm just gonna take this question and sort of give my perspective vis-a-vis experience and less experience. So that automatically will take up the age angle.
Now, next issue is, what are the fundamental roles and responsibilities of a board of directors in an organization? This is over to you, Veni ma'am.
Okay, all right. So typically, again, I'm going to divide this into two areas: board of directors consisting of the functional directors and board of directors consisting of the independent directors. So typically, you know, when you have the board of directors sitting on any agenda, on a set of agendas in a meeting, they will be talking, deciding, approving, or noting areas with respect to business, areas with respect to HR, areas with respect to compliance, and now, very importantly, areas with respect to IT. Emergingly, also areas with respect to ESG, or the environment, social, corporate segment. What happens in any organization is that the functional directors who are responsible for doing the business will be bringing in certain proposals that need to be run through the board. These proposals could relate to related party transactions. That means we're talking about loans being given or taken, or sales or purchase happening between parties, or acquisitions of maybe an asset or something between two organizations, transferring of licenses. So related parties could also, decisions could also come in. Varied types of agenda items would come from these board of directors. The role and the responsibility of this functional directors or set of directors is to ensure that what they bring in for the consideration of the entire board is a holistic, is a complete set of information with the justifications, with the reasoning, with the pros and cons of doing or not doing it, with the financial impact of doing or not doing it, the reputational impact of doing or not doing it. And then comes the role of the responsibility of the independent director to identify each transaction or each agenda item or each approval item or noting item with respect to all these parameters, identify whether they are being taken care of in the sense in which they have been portrayed to them, and go forward and take a decision. Ultimately, in the role of board of directors, the idea is to drive the business forward ethically while keeping the social environment impact in mind, while ensuring that the HR or the human resource of an organization is well looked after, while ensuring a lot of diversity, while ensuring that we are adopting to all the IT techniques that we can, while striking a balance between the latest techniques, technologies, and the human resource. So the role typically is huge. And accordingly, the responsibilities are even more. But the good part is that the authority that comes with it to define what this organization needs, wants, and is driving itself to brings about the sort of reasoning that comes to a collective boardroom to ultimately translate into certain types of decisions. So I would typically say that a fundamental role and responsibility of any board of directors is to all the stakeholders, not necessarily equally, but equitably. And every decision needs to be analyzed in all those parameters to ensure that profitability is not squeezing the human resource element, or the technology is not squeezing the human resource element, or the human resource element is not holding the company to ransom, and so technology is not coming in. Various broader macro level parameters which are to be aligned with the company's vision, mission, strategic working and implementation, that has to be driven by the board. Board is typically not responsible for actually working like consultants or functionality employees or like auditors, as they sit in the board, they have to see the larger picture. Over to you, Archana, to add whatever you'd like to.
I think that was very well explained. I think just a few additional points, if I may.
Please.
One is when you talk about the role of the board, obviously there are many aspects to it. When you look at the law talks about what are the powers of the board. Similarly, what are the duties of directors, etc. So I would I mean, I'm just sharing this for the benefit of those who really want to know from the legal perspective. Of course, there are requirements as to what is within the power of the board. What can the board do within in a physical meeting itself? Where can it delegate? What it can do through a video meeting, etc. So there are many requirements which are there in the law, and I just wanted to highlight there are powers and duties. And when I was reading this, I was very curious. I mean, we obviously look at the role of the board, and there I don't really distinguish between power and duty. Somewhere that both seem to kind of mingle, but these are very different, because power is a right and duty is an obligation. So very interesting. The requirements are there in law. You should look at it. I think one very important thing about Companies Act 2013 is that it has a code for independent directors. So before this, there was never a code. I mean, we've had the concept of independent directors, but in terms of their role or expectation, it was always it used to be very subjective. There was lack of clarity. I think I'm not aware whether any other law is based on the UK law. I mean, at least the Companies Act 1956. But if I look at it, I'm not aware of how many countries really have a separate code for independent director, but there is a Schedule Act, which is important. So like I said, the law gives you powers, it gives you the role, it gives you the duties, etc. And the duties are pretty onerous. And obviously, then you have the board, you have subcommittees of the board. You've got audit committee, risk management committee. So each will have its own role to play. And I think what even Veni tried to say, because it's a very broad question, then when I'm looking at the role, I will also look at the role of an independent director, the role of an executive director, the role of a non-executive but not independent director. So each has its own bit. And the law is quite detailed in that. But I think, like Veni said, if I was to take a broad picture, of course, the board has to govern and guide the company so that it can achieve its goals. And therefore, if you look at the board's prime duty is to work with transparency, to provide fair, independent judgment on the matters. And this is important because I think we frequently refer to the board being in a fiduciary role. So I think this is just wanted to highlight that there is a primary duty to work in transparency, provide fair, independent judgment on the matters. There are significant independence requirements so that board members do not have any personal, be it direct or indirect interest that may be against the company's reputation or create a conflicting situation. The board, so if I was to look at some 3 or 4 key role that the board plays, is one which Veni's already discussed, which is setting the strategic direction. So the board will define the vision, mission, policies, what is the long-term goal of the company. And of course, while doing so, it has to safeguard the interest of the stakeholders, especially the minority. So apart from strategic direction, the second larger bit, if I was to call it a category, is overseeing the management. So the board of directors oversees the management of the company, which includes appointing executives, determining the managerial compensation, monitoring and evaluating the performance of the executive team on agreed metrics and goals of the organization. And of course, then it has its own responsibilities in terms of, or obligations, if I can say, in terms of protecting sensitive information. The third category, if I was to say, is the financial accountability. And this is where I think, again, Veni's kind of referred to it from a compliance perspective. The board is responsible for overseeing the company's financial performance, ensuring accuracy, integrity of the financial statements. And of course, from a best practice, a board member is expected to attend the requisite meetings and be aware of the legal and regulatory compliances so that the matters can be addressed accordingly. And if I can just, the fourth or the last category I will take is in terms of protecting the stakeholders' interest. The board does serve as a link between management, shareholders, stakeholders, employees, customers. Like I said, it has a big role to play in terms of building trust between these stakeholders. And acting within its authority, the board is obligated to assist in protecting the legitimate interest of the company, its shareholders, and employees. So again, this goes back to working with transparency, accountability, culture of ethical behavior within the organization. I mean, I would put these as broad 4 buckets if you were to ask me in terms of the role that the board plays.
Ma'am, next issue with respect to the board directors' roles and eligibility is that what are the top risks on corporate agenda on 2024, and what is the role that board can play? This is I'm just raising this question with Veni ma'am, and then later on, Archana ma'am will throw light on the same.
Yeah, I think Archana will be able to throw much more light on this, but I'll just give you the perspective that I feel is important in this. And see, risks per se are, there are varied risks. So everybody's aware that when we talk about risks, we can parameterize risks into internal and external. We can parameterize them into business and reputational and IT risks, cyber risks, and various other human capital risks. I mean, if you're doing a business, everything that goes into it as an ingredient is also going to have a risk attached to it. So the corporate, I'll refer to this from the 2024 segment later. First, let's just understand that no matter what your corporate agenda is, there is a risk associated with every ingredient, every aspect of the business that you are actually handling or conducting. So once and it's number one, mandated in listed entities. Number two, if you are not in a listed entity, it is still advisable to always have a separate risk committee which identifies all these risks with the help of the management, the internal auditors, and various other level auditors, including statutory, costing, cost accounting, cost auditors, etc., to identify risk areas of your business, more pertinent than less in your specific cases. Having said that, and the risk committee forms matrices, they examine their transactions as well as their entire working against those risks, brings out the summary of that to the board, and then the board starts taking a call on where it needs to focus and what needs to be done in addition to what basic framework has already put in place. As far as 2024 typically is concerned, if you ask me, we are now progressing at almost a breakneck speed towards artificial intelligence and data security, IT risk, then cyber risk, then data security. These nomenclatures and exactly that chronology have been spoken about in huge terms as far as our business segments are concerned. But now what's happening is that we have a challenge from the AI segment also in every single business, because there are shortcut ways to doing things now. There are ways in which you can apply AI, and although initially it seems like a very easy way to adopt that technology vis-a-vis what we have been doing, but the shortcuts are not benchmarked against a lot of processes or procedures that had been put in place by the systems earlier. So AI is one area which, no matter how important it is, no matter that it's the new generation, that we will all adapt to it eventually, like we did to everything else, needs a lot of focus before it just sort of permeates into every element of the organization that it is doing right now. Whether we are creating reports, for example, let me not be generic. Let me say this specifically. When reports were created earlier or made earlier from any aspect, people would apply their mind to what was the requirement, what was checked, what was found, what was corrected, and then the entire thing was summarized and brought in front of the various committees up to the board. I have been very alarmingly seeing that a lot of people are putting these reports together through various AI technologies, including technologies like ChatGPT. So they've started using a lot of good words. They have started using a lot of good English. They are starting to make those reports look very beautiful. But if any person who has made that report is asked a single question about it, they really do not know what they have to say behind it because they've not made that report. They don't even typically understand every single nomenclature that has gone into that report. There's no ownership at all. So what I am trying, although I have used a very sort of a sidelined example to bring the point across, it's not that that is the only risk that we are facing. This is a very tiny example that a boardroom faces sometimes when a presenter of a particular agenda is the owner of that agenda and is not even able to explain what he or she is actually trying to say because they've coined words out of various areas which were not even relevant to that particular organization. So my understanding of this matter is that AI or the next gen in a manner has permeated and is continuing to permeate the entire segment of every organization. It's needed. We should adapt. It's new technology, but we should do it in a very graded way. So IT risk will never go away. It stays with us in any case. In addition to that, the cyber risk is increasing day by day. We have data issues internally and externally, which are still, despite so many mitigants and so many other areas, safeguards, they still exist. But now we have an added challenge with AI. Do not misunderstand me. We understand that every new technology that comes in needs adaptation in certain way. It's not to be wished away. It's to be adapted and accepted. But before we blindly just go ahead and walk into things, we need to understand where to accept it, how to accept it, and how to ensure that its negatives don't automatically permeate into every segment of the organization. And automatically, because of these reasons, I feel the fallout of these risks is the reputational risk. So these are the two areas which I would concentrate on, other than the normal ones that in any case are a framework of a risk segment or a risk, holistic risk study, as far as I would put my mind to it. Archana, I'd love for your input to come in.
Okay. When I was kind of just putting my thoughts together, of course, you've picked up the big one, but including that, I was looking at something like 5 or 6, issues which are right now at least under consideration. And actually, if you look at it, where these are coming from, if you look at the recent past, there's been unprecedented shift. You look at ESG to technology, which you mentioned, the geopolitical uncertainty, the regulatory changes, many aspects. And the board of directors always have to be at the forefront of navigating these complexities because these may require strategic realignment. They may need operational transformation. And typically when we discuss the risk landscape, we typically talk about 2 types of risk. One is what we call the existential risk, and the second is the predictable surprises. So in existential risk, you look at those threats which have the potential, let's say, to cause catastrophic harm to humanity. It could be a global pandemic, it could be a major cyber attack, environmental catastrophe. Now, these may seem remote. You may say, okay, how often do these happen? They may seem improbable. However, their potential impact cannot be ignored, as we've seen from our own experience in the recent period. Apart from existential risk, the other category, like I said, was the predictable surprises, which are events which not entirely unforeseen. They can catch an organization off guard due to its complacency or oversight. And therefore, if the board anticipates and plans for these potential surprises, it can be in a better position to kind of navigate through these unexpected situations. So if I was to look at 5 or 6 top risk, I do see global economic trends. I'll talk about that, the supply chain disruption, the financial risk, the technology bit, which you've spoken about. Talent is becoming an increasingly an area. And of course, climate change is the last one. So if I was to go on to the first one, which is the global economic trends, if you see there's a lot of geopolitical tension, there are trade disputes, economic uncertainties are there on global stage, and they can have far implications for the businesses because of global presence that many companies have. And when I say global presence, it need not be just your customer. You could be, like I said, importing and so on. Also in terms of the fluctuation in foreign currency exchange rates or trade policies can impact export-oriented industries. So I think the global economic trends, especially recently, we've seen a lot of change in the way this is really impacting business. The second, or in a way, if I can call it, it's a connected or a sub-product you can say of the supply chain disruption. The global uncertainties have also led to supply chain disruptions. They have become a significant concern due to their potential to disrupt the operations, the way it can impact the financial performance. Now, of course, to address this or to manage these situations, the boards will have to assess the vulnerability within their organization supply chain. And that means you have to identify, do you have critical dependencies? What is your supply resilience? What are the potential points of failure? And only by understanding the overall supply chain challenges can the boards develop a proper strategy. And I think I hear this, at least the supply chain disruption I'm hearing so often now. The next one is in terms of financial risk and strategic planning. So while Benny did say these are, I'm picking this up, but I do appreciate this is in a way an ongoing. This I wouldn't really say is very different, but the reason I'm still referring to it is because of the volatility and uncertainty that we've been recently seeing in the financial markets. Fluctuations in maybe the currency rates, the stock prices, interest rates, they can have significant implications as far as a company's financial performance or liquidity, or even how the company is allocating capital. All these are concerned. So I do feel this is another area that where the boards are being vigilant in terms of, in terms of their agenda. Climate change, I think we've been talking about it for some time, but I still feel it still continues to be high on the agenda. So with the growing awareness of the environmental impact, one is that the heightened scrutiny from stakeholders, your customers, investors, regulators. The boards are now proactively assessing and seeing how can they manage climate and environmental risk. But also, like I just said, when I said regulated, obviously now there are also regulatory compliances. So you've got certain regulatory compliances in the form of BRSR framework. And therefore, the boards are trying to see whether the companies have robust systems and processes in place to track and report these. There's been a lot of conversation around greenwashing, etc. So how do you really get comfort on the information which is being put out? And therefore, I still feel since we're in the initial period of BRSR reporting, this is again something which is very high on the agenda. Tech threat, I'm not going to repeat when you've covered it in details. I totally agree with you. I think while it is there, the main issue would be how do you, I think that is what maybe you were alluding to, is while yes, there is AI, is there responsible use of AI? How do you ensure bias is not there? How do you ensure transparency, accountability, and how are you ready for any unintended consequences and cyber attacks? So I will, in the interest of time, not repeat. The last bit I just wanted to share was on the talent pipeline. I do feel that there is a talent crunch. I think there's a lot of, even if you see the most recent budget, the way even the government is now investing in this, there are two issues. One is to say, do you have people coming in for employment? Yes, but the question is, are they employable, right? So there is a talent crunch, which is shortage of, I would say, workers with the necessary skill sets. So that is, of course, there. Then, of course, from a talent perspective, we've seen many other issues with the gig economy providing alternative employment opportunities. There are issues of even moonlighting, many, how do you retain top talent in such a competitive market and so on. So when you look at recruitment and retention strategies, that is again something that we see very high on the board agenda, at least in the current year. So yeah, so I think these are 5 or 6 I just wanted to highlight.
Yeah, so just to add one line to what you said, Rachna, as far as all these business risks are concerned, there is one more area that we need to be a little careful about, is that within these business risks, there is now also this risk that and which is becoming like an existential risk, so to speak. With the way technology is changing very, very fast, there are certain organizations that are so dependent on the way their entire functionality, their entire workability, their products, so to speak, or services are so in tune with what is happening in the latest tech segment, that all of these risks, business risks, have brought them to a point where Nokia could repeat itself all over again, but in a much shorter span. So people have not even been able to envisage that what they're doing today and is one of the robust businesses of all times could probably just in 6 months to a year disappear altogether. So tech companies typically are facing a very, very challenging crisis as far as even retaining themselves is concerned in the market. So just one more thought on that business risk.
Next issue is, ma'am, what are some of the best practices for onboarding
Before
of
we
a...
move on, I was just wondering if there are any questions till this stage. Maybe we can, are there any questions from the audience till this stage?
Ma'am, we can take a little bit later. Let's take
Okay.
this question first, and then, ma'am, I will just testing out whether we have received any questions or not. Ma'am, what are some of the best practices for onboarding of a new director? Now, this is with Ashna ma'am first, and then Veni ma'am will be throwing a light on the same.
I think I'm going to go back to what Vinny said somewhat in the beginning, that if earlier it used to be seen that, okay, if somebody is retired, then, post-retirement job was something that people looked at as a board seat, but that's actually, there's been a big shift. When you look at the profile of directors, so gone is that time, and now some of the actually being a director is being seen as a proper career path, and that is why, like, we just younger members coming into the board. So there is so while, like I said, we do see more interest. The question is, how do you? I think your question is more on the sorry, just you said it's like the best practice for onboarding, right? So I think when I would look at the onboarding bit, I would look at it from 2 sides. One is, if I'm an aspiring director, then what? And of course, when I join the entity, my initial onboarding. So I think I would cover the life cycle, if I can say that. Now, if I'm an aspiring director, first of all, I need to be able to demonstrate my ability to add value through my knowledge, expertise. Otherwise, why would any company hire me? And I think Veni did discuss in the beginning in terms of how you can, the courses that you can do, etc., what the training you can have to make sure you have the right skill sets. So if I was to look at the starting point of this journey, I would say first, the first step would be to identify which is your ideal board, in the sense, what kind of a board would you like to be? What kind of a role would you like to play on the board? And also, the next step would therefore be to understand the role of a director. So before joining the board, it is essential to have a very clear understanding of the responsibilities, the duties, the legal obligations. It's a very, very onerous role. I'm not trying to scare away. I'm just saying it's to be taken seriously. It is essential that you understand the role of a director. Like I said earlier, directors do have fiduciary duties, and a good understanding of this would help. And of course, the role of a director also keeps changing as the situation evolves, and therefore having a flexible, open, global mindset is something which has now become a prerequisite for a board member. So like I said, identify the board or on what position you want, then understand the role of a director, and then obviously see, do you have the skill sets and experience which is fit for the board. And this is where what Veni said comes in. that, if you don't have, you can always evaluate your strengths, weaknesses, areas that you need to work on. There are many courses, do those. And now once you've, let's say, built the skills and expertise, then research the organization that you intend to join as a board. Now, it is very important to thoroughly research the business, because you don't want to be associated with a company with poor governance or poor corporate governance environment. So important to thoroughly research the business, review the mission, values, as many documents, in terms of financial statements, whichever document will help you get a better understanding of the operations, the challenges, the opportunities, etc. The governance and the board composition becomes very important, I feel, because at least personally, when I feel the tone at the top is very important. And therefore, that takes me to the next point, which is also understanding the culture. So every organization has its unique culture, which influences how decisions are made and how work gets done. So if there is an aspiring director, I think getting a good sense of the culture is important, because if you're not aligned with the organization's culture, then you will have a hard time making a positive impact, and you may not really be able to do, have a proper tenure or be able to service properly as a board member. But let's say you've done this, like I said, you've understood the culture, you've joined the organization. I think what are some of the other things that you can do is, this is where even the role of the company comes into play, is there should be an initial onboarding session. The initial onboarding session can actually give the incoming director a good overview of what the business is, what are the services, what is the presence, what are the processes in place. Just familiarize the incoming director. So a good initial orientation session can be very, very helpful. I think it's also important to get to know the other directors, because it does, learning about the experiences of the other directors, their perspectives, will help building a strong relationship, and that can again assist in a more effective working. One thing which I missed saying earlier is that, of course, when you're looking at being a director, one should also understand the time commitment. And depending upon whether you're a executive, non-executive, independent, etc., the role can differ, but typically serving on a board will require a significant time commitment. And it depends upon the organization's size, complexity, needs. So you should understand the time commitment. You should ensure availability to attend meetings and participate in committees and engage in the board activities. And then I would say is also, going back to the point I made on the initial orientation session. I think apart from the initial orientation session and getting to know the other directors, one-on-one meeting with some of the key people in the organization can be very helpful. Maybe a catch-up session with the CEO, CFO, the chief risk officer, CIO, maybe heads of various or leaders of various divisions, including HR. I think all that can kind of help you understand the organization better. And I think it's not an onboarding thing, but generally, if you're a new director, just I think having a strong moral compass is very important, because otherwise you'll not be able to act independently or make decisions which are in the interest of the company, even if those decisions are difficult or unpopular. So the ability to make sound judgment, maintain independence. Of course, the directors will need to have a strong sense of ethical conduct. So I think how to identify, deal with conflicts, a strong moral compass therefore becomes very relevant. So I would say these are a few things maybe someone can consider while planning to join an organization, and then having joined, how to kind of initially settle down. Veni, you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'll just take this from a slightly different perspective, because you've covered most of the areas where the director needs to do his or her due diligence before entering an organization, which I completely agree with. So I'm going to take this from the perspective first of an independent director. while it is very important for the person who is being onboarded to or who is considering an organization to, of course, do the entire due diligence of that organization, understand that they want to come in, do the processes that you've already defined to achieve that level, come in, have an orientation, meet, interact, and then, as you said, settle in. It's also important for the independent director to understand one of the best practices that can happen is that for the director to understand that while he or she is interacting with all the stakeholders in the organization, that what are their expectations out of this director. So many times what happens is that, the initial meetings come out to be very professional, but slowly in the first 2 rounds of speaking to different stakeholders within the organization, you realize that the expectation of the company, and I don't necessarily mean that they want to see you as a dummy head only, because that is usually a very prevalent situation in the smaller organizations. But even in cases where, even in companies where they want your professional acumen to be a part of their value add system, they particularly are looking at certain types of expectations from you, and you may not be in that capacity to give value addition in that area. So please don't join an organization just because it's being offered to you. That's the first thing I'd like to say. The second thing I'd like to say, as far as the directors are concerned, is for all the independent directors who are aspirants and who've never sat on boards before, and who have also not had the opportunity to be presenting to the boards before, because many times auditors have presented to various boards when, various audit committees, they've had a chance to interact, or there are different types of consultants who have presented to the board, or you may have sat in the role of CXOs, or you may have sat in the role of certain level 2, people in the organization, but you would have presented to the board, so at least you're aware of the functionalities of a board. However, if you don't have any of those skills, but you're an aspirant director, nothing wrong with that. My suggestion to you would be, please don't jump into one of the biggest companies to begin with, even if you get the opportunity. Start a little small, go towards the private segment, go towards the unlisted public companies, learn the ropes. I've already spoken about what you will need to do, but also learn the ropes, the way a board functions, the way the committees function, what are the the do's and don'ts, what are the basic etiquettes that must be followed, what are your powers, your authorities, when to use what kind of a attitude really helps when you start small. It does not have to be that you start from one of the biggest organizations. That's something that I have seen people, whoever have followed that kind of a sort of a path, have been much better successful as people in boardrooms and larger and bigger organizations, because then they bring with them very types of perspectives, and they've had that journey while yet being new to a larger organization. One area that I would like to add for best practices for onboarding a new directors from the company's perspective, because maybe all our participants are either directors or aspiring directors, but maybe some of you are in business and you may want to have a board of your own in your organization, and you may want to bring somebody on your board. My advice to you is never to bring somebody on the board just because you know them. It helps to know a person. I'm not against getting a position somewhere, or giving somebody a position somewhere because they know each other. Knowing each other brings a modicum of confidence in the other person both ways. Nothing wrong with that. But what is important is that when you look at when you look at a person as a proposed director on an organization, you also as the person who's assessing that proposed director, either as a team collectively or as an individual, needs to put down on paper what that person is going to bring to your organization. So the value adds must be put on paper, and then those expectations must be very clearly discussed that you want to onboard, and only when you're on the same page. Now I'm saying this from the other side. There were expectations from them which the independent director can fulfill, cannot fulfill, can learn to fulfill. Only then there should be an onboarding of a director as far as the company is concerned. That's all I wanted to add to what you said, Rachna. That was already quite exhaustive.
Ma'am, we have received few queries, so I'm
Yeah.
just raising the queries. Can a functional director full-time of a public sector undertaking be an independent director with some other company?
Come again, please.
Can a
Where?
functional director of a public sector undertaking be an independent director with some other company?
No, I don't think so. We will have to see the specific rule, but I don't think so. It's a conflict of interest.
Okay, ma'am, then next
So
query.
let's just to kind of understand this a little better. So let's say if are you saying I'm a functional director, which means I'm an executive director?
Yeah.
It means I'm an executive director in company A and I want to be an independent director in company B, and you're saying it's an unrelated, not within the group at all.
Yeah, but she's also saying it's a public
Sector undertaking. Yes,
sector
ma'am.
undertaking. So public sector undertakings, to my understanding, do not allow this. What they do allow is that executive director sitting in one public sector unit can be a nominee director in many other units that are linked with that unit in one way or the other, because that is how the company has nominated the same person on various other boards where the companies are linked with that public sector unit. But to my mind, they cannot sit as an independent director while they are in service, because an executive director would be in service.
Yeah.
Next query, ma'am.
My sense is I'll check, but she's right, we'll need to check the law. My sense is probably if you're a managing director, whole-time director of an equity listed entity, let's say, the way I'm looking at, can I be an independent director in an unrelated entity? I think there is some permission there, but I'll check.
Not in the PSU category. Ashna, not in the PSU category.
Not in the PSU. Yeah, not in the PSU. So the question is specific to PSU?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Ma'am, next query is there a shortfall or surplus of independent directors presently? If any statistics available, kindly share.
Statistics, I don't know, but it's a bit of both. So there is a shortfall of independent directors in lots and lots of companies who are still paying penalties on many criterias of not onboarding women directors even today. And at the same time, there are lots of independent directors there in the market. So I know where you're coming from. Yes, we need a platform where the matching of the requirement as well as the availability is done, so that there is a holistic way of giving everybody the opportunity, and the companies being able to take the benefit of the expertise that is available in the market. To an extent, I think IICA's Independent Directors Data Bank is doing that, but there are lots of small organizations that have mushroomed and try to do this like headhunters and placements, but I don't think anybody is doing it in a very dedicated manner yet. But they're both, according to my mind. Archana, you can add to that.
No, I think you're the right person to answer this.
Ma'am, next query that we have received is, what if something important has not been brought to the knowledge of the board members? How do you deal with it?
Ashna, should I come in?
Yeah, please.
All right. So the first thing is that if there is something important that needs to be brought into the notice of any board member, I mean, a board per se, that important thing can arise out of 2-3 types of areas. One is the business. The second is the legal or the compliance aspect. And the third is a disruptional aspect. Now, if there's something that has come into the public domain for a reason and you still haven't heard about it, then before the board brings it to you, you can always write a mail to the head of the organization, the chairman or the MD, asking them to immediately bring that agenda and its discussion into the boardroom. In case there is a legal parameter or any other business area which has not hit the public domain yet, and it has also not come to you, there are 2-3 ways to assure that does not happen. One is to ensure that there is a checklist that is circulated amongst the functional directors as well as the top management, which is immediately below the board, which ensures that everything has a matrix where anything that happens has to come to the knowledge of the either a subcommittee or the board, depending upon its importance and its consequences within a certain period of time. Now, having said and put all those processes and procedures into place, if still something does not come to the board, then as far as at least the independent directors are concerned, they would not be liable. That is what I can say. You cannot ensure everything in life, but what you can ensure is by putting enough processes and enough checklists into place with timelines. Usually, no one person is responsible for doing this and bringing it to the board. The checklists and the timelines and the exigencies, the business continuity, disaster recovery, all of those policies put things in a place in a way that the reporting happens or can happen from multiple levels or multiple areas trigger that reporting. In case all of those processes have failed and nothing has been reported to the board, then when it comes to light, the board needs to understand whether it was hidden with a malified intention, whether it was an oversight, so the processes did not work and the procedures need to be completely overwhelmed, or whether, so is it malified or is it bona fide? One. Number two, is it an oversight? And if the oversight is a failure of the system, then that has to be tweaked and so on and so forth. But I can tell you that the independent directors, if they have not been made privy to this information by the way of a board meeting, and they were not in a position to understand or get any information in a public domain in the normal course of everyday's functioning, they would not be liable in case there's a consequence out of this. I can explain it in that fashion. Would you like to add something, Ajna?
So actually the last bit, what you said is what I was going to add. I think just a word of caution here. One is that I'm just in a way paraphrasing, but I just wanted to put it from that perspective, is that somewhere the independent directors have to exercise due diligence. Okay, so you just can't say, oh, it wasn't given to me. And that is where when he said, is it malified, is it oversight, etc. So to just say it was not given to me, you can't be, I'm just saying it's a very serious responsibility playing the role of a director. And that is why having the right processes, if I'm joining, let's say somewhere as a board, the first step would be to see what are the kind of processes in place or control give me comfort that I would get the right information. So that itself becomes very important. But let's say the right processes were there, etc. It still didn't come to you. Then of course I'll go to what Veni said, is it malified, is it oversight, etc. Because like she said, if it's an oversight or otherwise, is it that there was a weakness in the process? So I think somewhere it's a catch-22, a weakness in the process is also somewhere the board's responsibility. So having a strong, robust system and processes in place to capture, and like I said, due diligence, you'll actually have to demonstrate that you did exercise due diligence. Did you ask if it was very obvious this information should have been sought? Did you seek it? Were you then given, let's say, intentionally incorrect information or intentionally not given the information? And that's where it goes to malified, as Veni said. So I'm just wanted to put a word of caution that you do need to demonstrate due diligence from your perspective as well.
Yeah, and even if it is available to you on a public domain, which I'm not saying that you need to scrounge through every Google site to be able to get hold of that information.
But a reasonable
generally anything that can reasonably reach you should have reached you, and you should have those kind of what should I say, eyes and ears put into place at the right time to ensure that these kind of things related to an organization you're associated with does come into your site and your vision. Management, you feel is not doing its duty.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Next queries. Can ma'am, the viewers are asking, can you guide us on the way to come on board of the company as independent director when we are not founder, promoter, or lenders?
Yes, so if you're not founder, promoter, or lender, then you typically want to come onto the board as an independent director. I think I started the session with saying that the first thing that you need to do is considering that you're an aspirant director and you've not been one before, is that you need to go onto the site of the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs. They have under the MCA or the company law, there is a mandate that you have to register yourself on that portal. There is a further mandate that you have to understand whether you fall into the category where only registration is sufficient, or you need to also pass an exam that they have. It's a self-study and then a self-appear examination, which you can do, which puts you in the first level of eligibility criteria. And thereafter, you can be directors on boards, but so far the matching concept at the level of IICA between companies and the aspiring directors is happening, but it's still on a very small scale. I think they're in a position to upscale that, but that is something that that organization has to see. But you can go ahead and start from there.
Ma'am, any light, ma'am, you would like to throw, Archana ma'am, on this particular question?
I think I've discussed onboarding in general, or how you can, what you can do as an aspiring director. But if it's more from an opportunity, I think then Veni is the right person, and she's shared that. Do we move on to the next one?
Yeah, what does it say now?
Nisha?
Have we lost her?
Nisha, can you?
Sorry, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. The question was, they are asking about the role of director as actor in action and a viewer or observer, which is more preferred in present scenario.
Do you want to answer that, Archana, or should I take it?
No, please go ahead.
So, I think you'll have to repeat those coined words once for me, Nisha. Actor and doer and?
Actor in action or viewer?
Viewer or observer.
Okay, so, this is something that is... This is something that I will answer in a very generic way, because it's not specific to the duty of a director. It's specific to the duty of any type of obligation that you are in a position to discharge. I think you should be a viewer to the extent that you should be hearing everybody around you, and you should be having an open mind to grasp as well as try to understand the perspectives of the other directors on board on any particular agenda or item or discussion or decision that comes for the in front of the board for decision making. But you should never be a silent participant if you have something to question or something to add. There can be generic things that come to a board which don't typically need a lot of questioning, because whatever needs to be put into place has been put into place by the company. They have transparently explained it to you. They have given you the background information plus documentation plus everything. So there you can be just a silent reviewer, not a viewer, but a silent reviewer. And if you don't find anything amiss, you can let it pass. If you are a reviewer and you feel something is not enough given to you by way of either information or transparency or documentation, or you feel more is needed, or you may be just wanting to question something that you do not understand, please do not be a silent observer. Go ahead, ask your question, put the perspective in place in your mind. Don't follow suit because 3 other or 4 of the directors on the board just said yes to something, and you feel a little funny asking that question because they may feel that you don't know. It's okay not to know. I'm not here to know everything. I'm here to learn while teaching at the same time. I'm here to do my duty, but only after I've understood what I'm saying yes to. So your question can be answered in lots of yeses and lots of no's. You have to see the circumstance. You could be a silent observer or a viewer or a reviewer, but wherever needed, you need to be a very, very vocal participant. When I say vocal, I also mean very, very gentle, keeping the decorum of the boardroom intact, decorum of any other such space intact, but you must put your point across very firmly, very clearly, and wherever you feel you need more clarification, maybe you just need to understand what they're saying. You may be a person from a technical background of that business, but they may be talking about treasury issues. You may be a chartered accountant who understands everything about finances, but they may be talking about certain processes of certain technical business aspects which are not your forte. It's completely okay to understand. And without disrupting an agenda unnecessarily, I would recommend that before you even join a board, you must visit their factories, their premises, their works, so that you understand what that organization actually does. So I don't advocate any silent reviewers as a continued approach. But don't have a disruptive approach. Don't say something just to say.
Archana ma'am, anything you would like to say?
Yeah. So I like the perspective of reviewer that Veni's given. Of course, if I look at the board definitely has to be an actor. The board cannot be passive. It has to be an actor. When it comes to individual board members, I think depending upon the facts and situation, your role can differ. I totally agree with what Veni said. That perspective is very interesting. How you listen, how you kind of play that. And I was just going to use the word activist. Don't be an activist. I think she's just mentioned that wouldn't be disruptive. But there would definitely be situations where we expect board members to play the role of an actor. If the overall board has to be an actor, everybody just cannot be a viewer. I don't think you do justice. Viewer is an attribute in certain aspects, but I do feel there would be situations. The only thing I wanted to add is when you're acting as an actor, I hope you're behaving like a hero and not like the villain. So that's it.
Yes, ma'am. It was a lovely answer, ma'am. Ma'am, next question is how to handle conflicts or disagreements among board members?
How to handle conflict
and disagreements. So, I think I'll take that first and then Archana, please add. The major role that conflicts and these conflicts and what was the other word you added? Disagreements. So the major role is to be played by the chairperson of that board or committee. There are bound to be disagreements. You can have disagreements, just don't be disagreeable. You understand what I'm trying to say? So it's completely okay for two people or two, the boards can be divided sometimes. The board can be one-sided sometimes, and one person alone could be standing on the other side. It's completely okay to have a disagreement. It's completely okay to have different perspectives. That is why we need a board. Otherwise, one person could have easily made that decision that is coming to the board for. So when there is a disagreement on any particular decision, say, the first and the most important is the role of the chairperson who has to step in. One, to understand why there is a disagreement, what are the two or multiple perspectives that are coming out because of which this disagreement is arising. If the disagreement is arising because of a situation that can be rectified, like let's try to find a solution to it. So if it can be rectified by bringing in more information, bringing in more justification, bringing in an understanding of why what is being sought, can be given or not be given, then the chairperson should ideally defer that agenda with clear directions, asking the management to bring in information that can ultimately lead us towards a resolution. So typically, when I look at a disagreement, it would typically emanate in the following situation. The functional directors would bring in something for approval based on some information. The independent directors or the non-functional directors, which could also be non-executive directors who may or may not be independent, these directors would have a perspective and they would say, we do not agree, we will not approve. But your not agreeing and not approving of that particular segment of the directors can't be arbitrary. They have to say why they are not agreeing or why they are not approving, or what is that information that they have from the internal or external sources in the business that point to a different direction. Do they have any external benchmarking that says this is wrong? Do they have a professional qualification to say that the valuation report you are bringing in to sell off this land or to buy this land does not seem to be a very professionally made report, or there could be loopholes in that, or that it needs re-examining? I'm just giving you different perspectives of what could happen. So the chairperson here is responsible to ensure that the agenda gets deferred and all the information comes right back to the board, and then a decision / a solution can be arrived at. That's the first stage. The second stage is that suppose this is an agenda that has come for the second or the third time and still the information is either not complete, or if the information is complete, the information points in one particular direction. Then, as is the duty as well as it is as the power of the board can seek a third party assurance on this. You can ask some professional people, you can appoint an agency, or you can appoint the professional segment set of people in this from an outside perspective, from as a third party external agency, to come in and give their opinion based on what is good for the organization, plus what is the benchmarking of the industry, or what is the benchmarking or legal requirement of the regulator, etc. And thereafter, if all directors fall into one segment, but one director still feels that he or she cannot agree to this, although I don't recommend this at all, I leave this as the very last option in my board meeting to use this path. But if it comes to a situation of push and shove, and I know I'm right, then I always have the option to dissent. But like I always say, for the benefit of the people who understand this word, dissent is like a Shivastra. Once it is shot from the bow, the arrow has to hit a point and it has to do its good or bad. The damage or the good has to be done. So without a reasoning, without a proper justification, without an understanding of what you are doing, the effort of the entire board, specifically the chairperson who plays the key role, should be to be able to solve a problem rather than letting the board go into a dichotomy and then one person getting into a dissent criteria. Would you like to add anything to that, Ashna?
I think you just covered anything I wanted to say, but very interesting. If I can just reiterate, I think because reiteration, I think at times it just helps for people to absorb those points. But frankly, you've covered everything. I think the first bit on the chairman, the responsibility, I think if you look at the chairman does play a very critical role in terms of presiding over these board meetings and making sure that these are conducted properly. And there ensuring there is a healthy group dynamics where everyone is heard and respected helps. I think when you do have situations like this, it is important that the chairman navigates the group towards what is right rather than who is wrong. So it should be agenda rather than an individual focus. I think she's anyway covered. One thing she said, which was very interesting and is something which even we've learned over the years, she alluded to, is how can you disagree without being disagreeable? Yeah, it's taken me a lot of time to understand that, but I think over the years, I think that is, of course, and document the dissent is what I was going to come to. So you've covered that as well.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, the next issues that are there before us is pertaining to the rights and responsibilities of the board of directors. So, ma'am, the first issue that generally being raised by our viewers also with respect to this, can you explain the concept of fiduciary duty and how it impacts a director's decision making? So, this question I'm just bringing before the Veni ma'am first, and then Ashna ma'am will just share her views on the same.
I think by and large, in answering many of the questions, we've answered a part of this question anyway. Fiduciary duty, typically a legal duty, a duty that any director has to its stakeholders, and all the stakeholders, not just the shareholders, but all stakeholders. So the government is a stakeholder, the shareholders are a stakeholder, your own employees are stakeholders, your environment is a stakeholder, all the people who've joined the company as they're consultants to the organization, they're stakeholders. So everybody is a stakeholder who gets impacted by any decision that gets taken by any board of directors. So I will not say that it is going to be impacted by a director's decision making. I would say that the fiduciary duty exists on the entire board as a whole, which is why the board exists and not a single person as a director functions under a organization. Now, as far as specifications are concerned, I would say that legal duties typically emanate, because fiduciary typically would be taken as a legal duty. Legal duties would typically emanate from laws and regulations, regulators. So the first thing is that a director should be aware of what regulations and laws are applicable to the organization where he or she is functioning as a director. Very importantly, there should be a checklist on that. Secondly, because there is a duty, there is a legal duty that we will do the right thing. We will ensure that the money or the value of this business organization, rather than money, the value of the business organization will not get diluted in any way, so that every stakeholder is benefited from the business that we do. This is not a question or an answer that can be given in 2 lines. It basically, your entire business structure, from your vision to your execution, to your balance sheets, to your financial statements, their auditing, putting internal controls in place, ensuring that the internal controls are effective, the auditors doing their duty, all of that ultimately culminates into a board. All of that. And at that level, it becomes important for the board to collectively ensure that they are legally compliant, to ensure that the dilution of the enterprise in any fashion does not happen. So while any decision is being taken, you may be disinvesting a portion of your business. You may be organically growing by, acquiring a business. You may be simply buying or selling something within the organization, which has a significant impact. So it's, despite being ordinary course of the business, comes to the board. You might be taking a decision that technology has come into the organization in such a way that we need to now let go of some of our employees. Sometimes you have to end up taking very challenging decisions which do harm a segment of the stakeholders that are with you. But then it's the duty of the board to ensure that whatever is done by the rules, is done in as humane a possible manner as it can be, is done by ensuring that all the legal aspects have been covered. So according to my mind, this is how you would function and kind of discharge your fiduciary duty. Archana, would you like to add?
I think very comprehensive, but just one bit I wanted to add in very simple terms. It's like you're acting in trust. When you say I have a fiduciary duty, means you're holding something in trust for another. And if I'm in a fiduciary duty as a director, then in a way, I'm acting in trust for the company. And that is where effectively it means that you act in good faith. You act honestly, responsibly, keeping the company's interest paramount. So let's say if there is a conflict between your personal interest and the company's interest, obviously the company's interest has to be kept in mind. I think that is what it basically means. So you're not, as a director, you're not expected to obtain any secret profit. You must, in the sense it has to be what is legal. You have to exercise a typical level of skill and care. You're, in a way, like I said, acting as an agent or interest. So basically, in nutshell, you have to keep the company's interest over the personal interest. Let me reword this: company's interest over your personal interest, or even the interest of any individual member or creditor. And maybe, Veni, if you can just mention a little bit, from your practical experience, because I do feel this comes quite often. I wanted to just clarify this, quite often, let's say if I'm a nominee director, even if I'm nominee of a shareholder A, my duty will be first towards the company and then towards the interest of the company, of the shareholder of whom I am a nominee. There is a tendency to think, oh, I'm a nominee, I have to think about the shareholder who I'm representing. Yes, you have to, but that's where the catch is. You have to first place the company's interest, then I think quite often that aspect gets missed. So anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me be very clear. Once you are on the board of directors as a director, whether you are an independent director, an NED, a nominee, or a functional director, your first duty is towards the company. Everything else is thereafter. So, for example, I sit on Bank of India. while I'm sitting there as a shareholder director, there are some who have been nominated, in a certain category of chartered accountants or legal directors. There are some who are actually nominee directors from the government because they're the major shareholder. There's some who are from the nominee directors from RBI. Then they're functional directors. Once we are on the board, the first thing that every one of us is thinking of is the bank, or in a different example, the company. Thereafter, we think that, okay, this, the regulator has said something. Are you ensuring that you follow it properly? Because it's going to otherwise have a fallout. Okay, the stakeholder has said something, ease of doing business is coming up, or something, some other concepts are coming up. Are we driving ourselves in that direction as well? But in case we are driving ourselves in that direction to the detriment of something, that never happens. The first concept is always the company. The first priority is always the organization and its goals and its achievements, and to keep it in the right direction. And while doing that to the best of our ability, protect the nominees, the organization that nominates you, their interest also. But you're absolutely right. Once you're a director, your first duty is the company.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, next issue is, what are the directors' right in accessing company information and engaging with the management?
So all the rights. So typically, I'm going to answer this question from the point of view of an independent director or a non-executive director, because the others are all employee directors, including the MD. And they, in any case, have access to the entire company's information. And they are, in any case, the management itself that we are talking about being engaged with. So typically, you need to understand the structure of an organization. In a listed organization, the MD and all the functional directors are employees of the organization. Functional directors could be CEOs. They could also be COOs, CFOs, other CXOs, or not necessarily those, because they could be in the second or the third rung of the management. It depends upon the hierarchy of the organizational structure of the management. Typically, in listed companies, it is preferred that the chairman is going, or chairperson is going to be, an independent director. Then we have independent directors, and we have non-executive directors who don't want to function in an independent category, because typically they are giving in a little more time to the organization and they are better paid, so to speak, than the independent directors, but they are still not working on a day-to-day basis. So when and of course, nominee directors. Now, when you have nominee directors or NEDs, or you have independent directors, none of these people are basically employees of the organization. But each director, with a process flow that should be documented by the board itself, right in the beginning, or should always be available, and when you join a board, you should ask for it, has the power to ask for any information at any level. It is preferred, if you have a cohesive board and you have a sort of a ethically functioning organization, that you follow the process of writing to the board secretariat. The board secretariat then goes ahead, and board secretary, so to speak, he or she goes ahead, gets that information from the relevant vertical in the company and hands it over to you. That is always the best way to go about it, so that you're not always interacting directly with the lower. By lower, I don't mean that negatively. I just mean because of the hierarchy, that you're dealing with the lower hierarchical level of the organization, because that can sometimes lead to a different kind of a connotation. However, if you feel that somebody is thwarting your attempt, you can write an email from top to bottom to everybody and go ahead and get that information in whichever way possible you can get. But my advice is that you should follow a process that has been laid out first, and only if the process fails should you go directly to a lower level in the management directly. But you have complete right to access any information that you like. Also, please remember one thing: while you have this right, you also have the duty to understand that any information that you so seek is information that has to be kept as secret as it needs to be kept, depending upon whether that information is available in the public domain or not, depending upon various other parameters. It is your duty to ensure that that information stays confidential, and because of you, nobody else becomes privy to that information who does not need to have access to that information. So be very careful if you are exercising this right. Don't loosely use this right. Be extra careful about protecting that information as well. Would you like to add anything, Ashu? Nisha, do we have any other questions?
Yes, ma'am. What are the best practices for ensuring effective board meetings and decision-making processes?
Typically, as I said, the best practice is, first of all, that the chairperson has to be a person of a very balanced demeanor, has to have a balanced functionality approach. The second thing is that whatever needs to come to any board meeting or any subcommittee of the board should have some kind of a predefined checklist. We call it a calendar of reviews in some companies. We call it a list of or a checklist of agendas that need to come in. Depending upon the size, scale, and the type of company you are a director in, there can be different frequencies in which a board meeting is held. It could be just quarterly as defined and as basically required by the Companies Act, or it could be more frequent and in a much larger frequency. Accordingly, what needs to come in which meetings must be predefined. So at least there should be a checklist which says that this has to come in a frequency of 6 monthly, this has to come in annually, this has to come in quarterly. If you feel that the organization requires board meetings intermittently, then there should be a way in which any board member should be able to write to the board secretariat, copy to the other directors, asking for a meeting for a particular reason. Once a board meeting is conducted or started, the agendas that have been listed should be chronologically taken. It should be, you can take it in different chronologies, but it's preferred to do it like that. You should bifurcate between agendas that relate to confirmations, like minutes. You should bifurcate between the agendas that need your approval because they will need much, much more discussion. There could be agendas that just come for noting or for information of the board. Yes, you have a right to give directions on those as well, but they typically are there because you at some point of time had said that, okay, I need to be informed about this periodically, etc. The most important way and the most effective way of conducting a board meeting is to ensure that every action point emanates into an action taken report. It goes into an action taken report, and action taken reports must be viewed in every board meeting, again bifurcated into complied with the reasoning of how it is complied with, in compliance or work in progress with timelines and what is the current status. So some of these things help in making decisions going forward, because we know where we are and where we want to be. As far as a point I want to highlight here is that there are companies, organizations that have a habit of bombarding the directors with agendas in a way that each agenda is so voluminous that by the time you have gone from the beginning to the end of the agenda, you've literally forgotten what you read in the beginning. Now, what happens is in many, many organizations, the management thinks that the easiest way to get a yes on an agenda is to give so much information that the directors themselves get lost somewhere in that information. And also, in a way, they pass on the responsibility of everything that they have done to you, because they have sort of given you everything in that agenda. There's nothing that they have not written there or nothing that they have not appended there. So here the wisdom of the board and the chairperson, but also each and every board member comes to play. One, you should be in a position to tell them that we will not accept emails and internal communications, etc., as part of any agenda items. We want a properly drafted agenda which specifies what is the reason, what is the need of this agenda, why are you coming to us? Is it because of a legal requirement? Is it because we asked you to come back? Is it because of best practice, etc.? What is it that you seek from us? What will be the ultimate resolution? That draft resolution should be in the agenda. And then what are the justifications for us to approve this agenda, backed by a certain amount of papers? If all of that reads in a sensible way, it's fine. If all of that is too much of information, then there has to be a summarized executive summary coming to you, and you have to clearly indicate to the management that you are going to base your entire decision on this executive summary. So if something needs to be highlighted on a particular page that has been appended for to be read separately, then it should be specified there. Similarly, those organizations that like to give you skeletal agendas, they need to be brought up to a level where they start giving you all the relevant information. Otherwise, please go ahead and defer those agendas. Never take a decision with half-baked information. Never take a decision with, okay, we will correct this and we will put it, in the minutes, but you approve it as it is right now. Please don't go ahead and do that. If they have to bring you with an addendum or if suppose something is urgent, it can't be deferred, you can always ask them to bring an addendum on which you're going to comment in the next 1 hour or 2 hours. And then after that, you will approve the agenda. So you can have your effective board meetings in that fashion.
Archana ma'am, anything you would like to say?
I think she's covered it so well. And I was just jotting down points and kept on crossing them because she's covered most of them. But let me just quickly, some of them may seem like an overlap. I think, and again, at the cost of reiterating because of the relevance of it, I think it's important that there is adequate notice given, in terms of the agenda when it is given to the members. There is full information, and what is full information? I think she's anyway discussed. There has to be a good balance. It should not be an overload or it should not be skeletal. So I'm not going to repeat that, but the right amount of information, and obviously the right amount of time is also allocated to an agenda item for the discussion. From a best practice, I think also I'm going back to where we started from. Having the right skill set or the right composition is important. Attendance of board members, frequency of the meetings, that becomes important. I think there is also concern about, and when he did in a previous question refer to it, when she was talking about being a viewer or an actor, is that when something is wrong, board member should be able to speak up. So I think it's on to the chairman also as to how does he create an environment where if there is a red flag, if someone is uncomfortable, they're able to speak up. So it's like saying, how do you encourage a constructive, a positive and a constructive discussion? If there are concerns, they should be brought up, and how it is dealt with in a very constructive manner. I think she referred to the action taken report. I was just going to mention that as well. The effective implementation of the decisions of the board is very, very critical. It shouldn't be something was decided, it's just lying in the minutes. Similarly, when she spoke about checklist, etc., I think it is important to have certain checklists to see how things are progressing. It could be about, we spoke earlier about issues which are on the radar of the audit committee for the current year. Legal compliances, related party, funds or transactions with promoter, related entities. These are some which are very sensitive right now. So I think very specific attention. It'll all depend upon what processes the board has put in place to get this information. Having separate conversations, very specific conversations and regular conversations with internal auditor. I think it's also important. It helps as to how do you connect with the I've seen at least as a good practice, and it does help if, let's say, the audit committee chair has a separate meeting one-on-one with the statutory auditor, so that if there is any concern, they're able to kind of share that without the fear of, how it is being seen at a broader board level. So I think all of these things matter. But two things, if I can then just highlight is, you can do all of these things, but if the tone at the top is not right, then whatever process you may put in place, it will not have the right outcome. So I do feel tone at the top is a prerequisite. And the other bit is the communication and coordination among various board committees, because given the range of activities, many of these are many of these are delegated to subcommittees. Company could have various subcommittees looking at maybe sustainability, tech, and so on. We discussed. So the question is how is this information being shared? So areas where committee oversight responsibilities overlap, is there a process to have regular or frequent communication? It shouldn't be that two subcommittees are looking at, matters wherein there is some bit of overlap, but they don't have the same information and they're both operating. It's like saying the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So just the communication and coordination, I think, yeah, that's what I wanted to just say, a coordination and communication within the committees and tone at the top. Yeah, these two.
I'm going to add two things from your thought processes, Archana, to this conversation. One, when you talk about the tone on the top, one thing that chairman is also, or the chairperson is also responsible for ensuring is not just that everybody gets a point of view in, but also that one director in the entire meeting doesn't hijack the meeting, because that does happen sometimes. And it's very important that that doesn't happen. There are people who would like to say their piece and then they just don't want to listen to anybody else. So they keep arguing over everything as if their point is being attacked. So the chairperson has a very difficult role to play in ensuring that, that calm demeanor is maintained. And one area which you touched upon was very interesting. Board committees, typically there are 4, 5, 6 committees that are now mandated in any case, and good companies usually have a few more, because nobody at the board level wants to go ahead and hold a board meeting for an entire day, right? And if you have enough agendas coming in and your meetings are only quarterly or even 6 meetings a year, typically you can end up taking between 4 to even 7 hours for a board meeting if you don't have subcommittees to handle things. So some of them are mandated, like the audit committee, risk committee, stakeholders, CSR, etc. But even where they are not mandated, it is a good idea for the board to have these subcommittees. The subcommittee should ideally have one person who is technically qualified for that committee, one person who has a financial background, because everything revolves around a financial segment also, which could also be this, an invitee like a CFO sometimes, and one person who has the compliance impact. Very importantly, for the board to get an assurance from the audit committee that things are working well, and something that I do personally wherever I chair audit committees, ensure an interaction with all the auditors, not just the statutory auditor, but the stat auditor, the internal, the secretarial, cost auditor, depending on whatever is applicable to an organization. Ensure that you meet with these auditors also one-on-one, maybe in the presence of the CFO, may not be in the presence of the CFO, depending upon how you feel it needs to be handled there. And this should be outside of the normal audit committee meetings that are being held. In addition to that, audit committee can together, if they all have the expertise and the willingness, they can all together also have independent meetings with the statutory auditors, say for half an hour before a audit committee actually begins or after the audit committee is over, depending upon how you want to portray it. So there are various ways in which these committees can be made effective, which then automatically makes the board decisions become effective. So thank you for adding that. I just wanted to add my 2 pieces as well.
A few more queries we have
5 minutes. 5 minutes, while I know we have many other aspects to discuss, but if you want, maybe we can take the questions first, if there's anything from the participants.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, the question that we have received on our screen is, ma'am, on boarding of a new director, are you suggesting that the incumbent director should have something similar to the letter of engagement executed by incoming auditor, setting out areas of interest of the director and expectations of the company or existing board?
You said letter of engagement executed by incoming auditor?
Incoming auditor.
Incoming auditor?
Yes, ma'am.
No, I think the question is wrongly framed.
Yeah.
Like an incoming auditor, there is an engagement letter. Like that, I think there should be yes, there is always an engagement letter or an official appointment that is given to every independent director, which defines their roles, their rights, whatever they're going to be remunerated through sitting fees or any other compensation elements, what they can do, what they cannot do, along with the fact that they have to demonstrate their independence at the beginning of their tenure, and continuously, as per the legal requirement, they have to also demonstrate their independence. So all of that gets put into that letter. Yes, it is to be done.
So it's just that it's not called an engagement letter. Like she said, it's a letter of appointment. And I do not know where this question is coming from, but I think it's an interesting one because I do remember in some of the regulatory orders, I think this issue came up somewhere. I don't remember it exactly, but the letter or maybe not in a regulatory order, but somewhere some discussion. But the appointment letter will work as the engagement letter. And there
Then
is a
next,
proper process. You know, if you see, like she's just alluded to, there is a consent of the director which is given. There is a declaration which is included. Then there is the nomination remuneration committee will approve, the board will approve, etc. So there will be proper compliance on this.
ma'am, next question is, in the interest keeping one abreast of development in the organization, can directors collect independent information from staff, trade unions, or shareholder associations, etc., instead of solely depending on information provided by the management?
I think we've already answered this question, that there is a process and a flow in place in every company. If it's not there, then go ahead and put that in place first. Ensure there is a policy on how to seek information, then ensure there is a process around it. If that process can be used, that is the best. Otherwise, you do have the authority to get hold of information from other people as long as you protect that information.
Ma'am, next question is, there are few organizations who are providing some skilling courses for the director. Would you recommend going through with these courses, and would they provide any real value add, especially for folks who are not CAs or lawyers?
While as I would recommend that you upskill yourself with whatever courses possible, understand, for those who are not CAs and lawyers, get a financial intelligence added to your skill, so that when you sit on a board, you understand what is being spoken about. I'm not an advocate of any particular agency over any particular agency because that's not my job to do at this forum. There are, however, lots of organizations that have mushroomed up. Please do your due diligence vis-a-vis the time, the quality, the feedback that you are getting. I do know that from the government perspective, although it's an independent body, IICA is also doing that. Why I keep using that organization again and again is because they're legally mandated with certain types of, they've been given some legal mandates on certain areas of independent directors. So they are also doing this activity from time to time. In addition to that, there are lots and lots of private organizations that are doing this. You will have to take a pick, but I do recommend upskilling yourself no matter where you do it. Skilling / reskilling / upskilling is to be done all the time. Never forget to read, never forget to study. And in fact, while I'm saying that, never walk into a board meeting without reading your agenda thoroughly, because if you're doing that, you're doing a disservice to yourself as well as to everybody in the board. Because you will be expecting everybody to, especially the owner of that agenda, to explain everything to you in detail, which will take up too much of time to sort out or to solve or to give a direction to that agenda. It is expected that everything is read in letter and spirit by everybody who joins the board meeting based on the agenda circulated in time.
And last question is there on the screen, ma'am. Sharing of sensitive information is done at the last moment or in short notice. So your guidance on how to effectively handle by independent directors in such condition?
So the very first thing is that I'm glad that the companies that you are associated with are doing it on short notice, because there is such a concept of the UPSI, or the unpublished sensitive information, which is looked at in a very, very close, microscopic manner by SEBI, especially for cases of, mainly for cases of listed entities, because everybody understands the concept of insider trading. If you don't, for anybody who doesn't, for their purpose, I can give you a half-liner saying that you are using information of the company to effectively, profit yourself or somebody around you, which is unethical, which is punishable, which is a punishable offense, and which can land you in deep trouble. So having said that, companies follow a good practice of, especially listed companies, of giving you the financial information absolutely at the last minute, or sometimes literally tabling it at the at the board meeting itself. If you are already a part of the audit committee, you would have received it prior to receiving it in the board meeting. But my recommendations usually are that both should be held on the same day, if possible back to back, if not possible at least on the same day, or where an organization is handicapped enough not to be able to do it on the same day, then the audit committee and the board should meet one after the other on 2 separate days, but then those days should be when the markets are closed, assuming you're not exposed globally. All those parameters should be taken into consideration. Now, coming to your actual question, that since everything is given at the last minute, how do I handle the matter? So typically, as I was just saying this at another forum yesterday, there is 3 set of information that you really need to understand, which usually gets highlighted by your CFO in any case if the performance is good. The first is your profit and loss account, where increase or decrease in your revenues, your expenses, and then the profit in segments of your EBITDA, interest, depreciation, PBT or profit before tax, tax and PAT or profit after tax, typically gets highlighted by your CFO in a manner where they give you comparatives with the previous year or the previous period. They give you the percentages and achievements vis-a-vis what was budgeted. So once that presentation is heard in a detailed manner, you are in any case in a position to understand exactly what the company has achieved in the previous quarter or whatever periodicity those accounts pertain to. The second, and so your questions should typically be more around, okay, if our revenues have increased, have they increased segmentally? Which segments have seen a better, view, and which segments need to we need to work on? Is there a one-time income which is not going to be there the next time? Or have we had a one-time expense that has pulled down our profits? When you look at expense, absolute value of those expenses should not be looked into great detail. What you need to see is, again, percentages of, in terms of ratios and percentages, they will present it to you. And that has more meaning because you can see it's going up or going down with the relevance. And that is something that even people who don't have a lot of financial background or who are not CAs or lawyers per se can also be able to, look at and understand quite easily. Your CFO should be encouraged to, other than giving you these 3 statements of balance sheet, profit and loss account, and cash flow, depict most of the other things in pie charts and in bar diagrams because it's easier to understand them and their flow and comparison. So that is a way in which you can, understand these things. Your questions can, as I said, in the profit and loss account, be around one-time incomes and expenses, growth prospects, whether we are meeting our budgets, whether we've exceeded them. Was that because the budgeting was on a very, very conservative level, or was it because we were able to do better? Has our HR expense gone up by a huge amount? Did we end up giving a lot of overtime, and so on and so forth? In the balance sheet, you can have a lot of questions with respect to, what is the change in my assets, my liabilities? Do we have any MSME, compliances that have not been met? So those kind of information. Cash flows typically will give me a very easy and clear understanding of whether I'm a cash-rich company or whether my loans are there. And one important question to understand, which usually the audit committee does before the board, is whether my loans are being utilized for what they are being taken, because that's like a legal connotation. So when this comes to you, and typically all the important notes come to you, the company always gives you a little time while they are demonstrating this to also go through the documents and read them. Even for non-financial people, reading the notes behind the numbers is sometimes much, much more important than reading the numbers, because the numbers get highlighted in any which way. So I think that's sufficient time if you have been able to read the company's financials prior periods. If you have been able to read them beforehand, then when you read a comparative figure now, you will be able to understand that at a short time span as well.
If I can just add one point,
Please.
while of course you're on the board, so you have better understanding of how to deal with it. But I'll just be one point of caution here. One is, when Veni's discussed this, she's presumed that this giving you of the information at a short notice is justified. So that's a presumption. So I'm just cautioning on that. See, is it that the company routinely gives you these information which can be given earlier? Okay. it may be sensitive, but it doesn't even what is the normal time, or let me say an average time, even the other companies, the notice which the companies give. There's some information which can be given, let's say 5 days earlier, you're given only one day earlier, whatever. I would be careful then, because that would be a red flag for me. Same for everyone. The other bit I would say is, even if it is, let's say, a sensitive information, UPSI or whatever it is, if even after asking the questions that she told you, looking at those things, if there is a discomfort, I would request, do not, if you're not uncomfortable, just don't put your stamp to it. Ask if discussion needs to be extended, so be it, but never put your stamp on something, I would say, till the time your issues are resolved. And I'm saying this in obviously presuming that it is a constructive discussion and all those things. You have genuine, you're seeking information. Let's say you're not getting the right kind of inputs, etc. So that's, I just wanted to put that word.
Archana, I'm going to add,
because quite often.
No, please continue, then I will speak.
Yeah, I was just saying that it shouldn't be that the short notice is being used as an excuse to, bury something. You just need to be careful on that. That's all I was saying. So as long as you're careful on that and it's a justified situation, then exactly what you said can work.
Yeah, I need to come in just to ensure that the audience is not confused about this. When I'm talking about justifying the information coming in at short notice, it is very specific type of information which relates to typically the concept of UPSI. There is some kind of an information that falls in that category that has been defined by the regulator, by SEBI. Only that information coming in at short notice is actually a protection to the entire board. And especially to the audit committee chair and the audit committee's members, but to the entire board, that is a protection when it comes in late. It can come in earlier. It's not that there is a prohibition, but then the moment it comes in earlier, your understanding is on one side, and any leakage of that information and its consequences, which are really dire, is on the other side. So the balance has to be struck between the board members and the audit committee members to understand whether that is their risk appetite or not, and whether they are willing to take that risk. Because once it is broadcasted to the audit committee and then to the board prior, a certain period before the meetings happen, like any other normal agendas do, then the possibility of things going wrong is very, very high. The risk is very, very huge for us to, the appetite has to be defined. And I personally would not have that appetite if I was an audit chair. But as far as other types of information is concerned, which the management might say is sensitive information, but legally does not form under those categories, there you make the distinction. And I agree with you, Archana, that is a red flag if things are coming to you continuously at the last minute. There are predefined, and you can redefine them if you like to make them even stricter or looser. There are predefined protocols. You have to give a notice certain number of days before the meeting. The agendas have to come in a certain number of days before the meeting happens. If, for example, in our very big organizations where sometimes they do have urgencies and exigencies, we do not accept any agenda item that does not come to us at least 72 hours prior to the meeting. So although it's supposed to come in 7 days before, but there are times when
I understand. Because I thought I just wanted them to apply that filter.
I'm just saying all this just to ensure that the audience doesn't stay confused. Should we do this or should we do that?
And the last bit is, I think, just to your point only, I think if there have been regular interactions and if you had a good understanding of what the company is going through, I think then the points that Veni said, when you're looking at financial information, they should even stack up well. If you know how the business has moved, were there difficulties, were there supply issues, how has the business been doing? If you have a broader idea, you know how the business has been overall moving, which direction, I think it just also helps. Rather than just looking at that financial information in isolation, the overall, the build up to that also can be helpful. So use that information as well. Yeah, I think we've anyway crossed the scheduled time, so we'll hand it back to Nisha.
Thank you, ma'am. It was really very wonderful and very enlightening session, ma'am. And thank you, Veni, ma'am. And thank you, Archana, ma'am. And ma'am, it was really a wonderful and throwing insight on various important aspects related to the effective and efficient functioning of the company's board of directors in fulfilling its governance duties. So that was a really, really very insightful session that way. So I would now invite Seema to give vote of thanks. So Seema.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. As we conclude this insightful webinar on board excellence, I want to extend our heartfelt thanks to all those who made today's event a resounding success. On behalf of the entire Corporate Laws and Corporate Governance Committee of ICAI, a sincere thank you to our distinguished speakers, CA Veni Thapar ma'am and CA Archana Bhutani ma'am. Ma'am, your expertise and perspectives on board governance have been incredibly valuable for this session. The depth of knowledge you have shared with us undoubtedly it will guide many of us in enhancing the board practices and striving for excellence. A special thank you to both of you and to our participants for your active engagement and your thoughtful questions. We look forward for your continued engagement and welcoming you at future events. Thank you once again and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.